My name is Advait Jog. I am with University of Virginia. Today, it's our pleasure. Professor Onur Mutlu from ETH Zurich has joined our channel. His research interests are in the area of computer architecture, systems, security, and bioinformatics. We are currently at FCRC in Orlando, Florida. We are so happy that you agreed to give this interview.
Thank you.
So we have a bunch of questions, and we would love to hear your thoughts on that. And I believe that our community will learn a lot from your experiences and your views. So first question is that why did you choose academia?
Oh, okay. That's a great question. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's nice to do it. We tried to do it in earlier conferences, but we never were able to due to the schedules. Why did I choose academia? Because it's fun. But I mean, that's the short answer, of course. But the longer answer is, after my PhD, I went to Microsoft Research, which was a great academic environment. I had a lot of freedom to determine my research agenda, do a lot of exciting research, work with a lot of interns, and publish also. So I enjoyed it quite a bit. But I was also thinking, maybe this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. So the main reason why I moved from industry to academia is threefold, I think. One is I wanted to work with students, and you could work with students in industry through internships, but that's a more short-term relationship. I wanted to have this more longer-term mentoring relationship and impact, both for PhD students as well as undergrads of all sorts, right? So it's very hard to get that in industry. That's the main function of an academic, I would say. So I like that. The second reason is really I wanted to teach. I enjoyed teaching. Of course, you can teach in industry as well, especially in an academic place, more or less academic place like Microsoft Research. But you don't get rewarded for it, or you're not. I mean, you don't get rewarded for teaching in academia also in general. But I enjoy teaching, and teaching courses and improving them over a long term happens in academia. You get more chance to do it. And the third reason I would say is really impact. Meaning, of course, in industry you could have impact. Microsoft Research has had a lot of impact on both products as well as general academia. In product groups, you can have a lot of impact also. But I feel your impact is more local. It could be global, sure, but it's harder to make it global when you're in a company. And sometimes you may not even be able to talk about what you're doing in a company. Whereas academia is more free, and you can have more impact with openly sharing your research, classes, everything essentially. So I believe the impact you can have in academia is much broader, although it may be more difficult to immediately influence the products at hand. You don't have that, of course, in academia, right?
Yes. Great. So according to you, what are some of the most exciting opportunities in your research field, or also nearby research field, because your research also intersects with other conferences happening at FCRC. So I'm just curious to know, someone who is looking to get into research related to computer architecture or systems, could you give some insights on what are some of the opportunities in these areas?
Yeah, of course. That's a great question. I think there's a lot in research, of course. And you mentioned, I think, 4 words describing my research. Right. Computer architecture, systems, security, and bioinformatics. Right. So, of course, I'm very excited about all of these areas. And we're working on these areas. I believe these are big and important, and I encourage everyone to look at them. But there's, of course, more. Maybe if you look at computer architecture, let's say, there's a lot to do here, and this is a good time to be a computer architect, because there used to be a time when it felt more stagnant, where the focus was on more general purpose computation. Today you can do general purpose computation as well as very special purpose computation and everything in between, reconfigurable computation, and they're all part of the mainstream, I would say. So that's exciting, I think. So looking at how computation evolves going into the future, and how we will overcome the performance, energy, security, reliability bottlenecks is a great general topic, of course. Now, if you go into specifics, I think how to make computation much more fundamentally efficient is important. So I think looking into new paradigms of computation is interesting, especially processing near memory, not moving data as much. So we were doing a lot of work on processing in memory, in storage. So that's a big area, I think. Security is huge, I think. Hardware security and security, hardware software interaction of security is exciting. And you can see that in conferences today. And one of the things that I'm quite excited about is like emerging application domains. Clearly, machine learning is interesting, and a lot of people are working on it. So I'm not going to talk about that. But another, I believe, a very important domain that is going to emerge a lot more into the future is genomics, in my opinion, because the technology is evolving very fast. We can actually generate a lot more genomic data than we could in the past, and we need a lot more analysis on genomic data. So understanding how you can design better algorithms as well as architectures for genomics is quite exciting, in my opinion. And it's not genomics also, actually. Genomics is only part of the bioinformatics field. There's genomics, there's proteomics, there's also other analyses that you do with biological sequences. So it's a huge field. So I think that, and there's more work that's coming up at conferences like ISCA, for example, on genomics. So I think that's quite exciting. I mean, these are just some topics that we are working on. There's, of course, a lot more as well. It's good to look at emerging technologies, like emerging memory technologies, because memory scaling is not going well. We're also working on that, but that's a bit on the back burner right now. We had done a lot of work on that topic in the past. Yeah, I think that's probably a good summary for now. We can go into more detail if you have more detailed questions.
Okay, great. Yeah, we have some more questions which probably will be related to what we just now discussed.
Yeah, I'm happy to go into detail. I can talk about research for hours, but I don't want to keep you here for hours. And I'll have my flight later on. So, yeah.
So we discussed like, a couple of research topics, right? And I think you mentioned your interest in architecture, systems, and security. So when you, like, how do you pick a new research area, or new research topic for a student to work on or for you to brainstorm about? I'm just curious to know how you think about new problems.
Yeah, that's a great question also. I mean, I'm not sure if I have a perfect answer to that, because some of this is more ad hoc, right? I think one thing that's very useful for me, at least, is to think about the system as a blank slate, let's say, or think about what issues we have in a current system, bottlenecks, and what would you do if you actually had complete freedom to change the system. So that's a very good approach to think about it. So we have, for example, memory today, and memory is not able to do computation. What if we had complete freedom to actually do computation? How would we change memory? Of course, it may be difficult to have absolute complete freedom. So you need to add some constraints later on, right? And then some topics emerge that way. So I like that sort of, let's say, first principles kind of thinking. I think that's one thing that enables new research areas. I'm not talking about specific papers, but more bigger research areas. But specific papers, of course, come after you start focusing on the bigger research area. I think in other ways, of course, looking at, I like thinking about like emerging technologies, as we mentioned, right? Looking at what's going on in some surrounding communities. That was part of your earlier question. Surrounding communities helps, and especially device communities. They're doing a lot of interesting stuff that normally doesn't get exposed to us, because even FCRC doesn't have device communities here, right? We don't have the IEDM conference. Or circuit community, ISSCC, together with FCRC. But looking at papers or works that are published in those communities, sometimes attending those conferences, talking with colleagues who are working in that area, kind of opens my eye. And I believe it opens a lot of people's eyes, because they're working on something that may not ever happen or may happen in 50 years. But if you can actually strike a balance and understand what they're doing, and it could be, you see that, this technology could be scalable going into the future, that could actually have a lot of impact. This is what we have done, for example, with phase change memory. We had a paper at ISCA in 2009 on phase change memory, and that came after a lot of discussions with many people. And also, I think there are other technologies that are coming up that are similar. So that's the lower level part. And then there's the upper level part, which is, it's also good to look at communities, let's say applications that, let's say, are evolving. I think that's how our genomics research started. I started reading some papers on genome analysis back in 2007, 6 actually, when I was at Microsoft Research. And then I started discussing with some of my friends, or a particular friend actually at University of Washington, Genome Sciences Department. And we started thinking, oh, what can we do to make genome analysis much better for the masses, let's say. And the idea of accelerating genomics, hopefully using an embedded device, which didn't exist at the time, came about that way.
Got it.
So I think this sort of cross-field discussions and interactions catalyze a lot. But of course, that's not enough. I think if you really want to do a contribution fundamental to your field, it's of course important to look at things in a different way.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. So the related question is, in terms of research, right? I think forming a research group is super critical, right? In terms of mentoring students and also looking at their research interest as well as your research vision, right? So when you recruit students, how do you recruit students? I think everybody wants to actually, especially in academic setting, it's not very clear what are some of the best principles to recruit students which are good fit for the group. Do you have, like, over the years, have you adopted any strategies to sort of answer that question?
Yeah. That's a good question also. I mean, it's again not a perfect process, right? As you said, there's no perfect way of doing it. But the way we do it in my group is usually students apply in some way, and then we start discussing students. So I, for example, tell the students, okay, what kind of ideas you have. I try to basically see how they think. I think that's the most important part for me. How they think, can they actually question what's going on in a paper, let's say. So actually asking them to read a paper and analyze it critically using some methodology that we suggest to them. And then asking them to, develop ideas, criticize, find the weaknesses. And so that thought process, seeing that thought process is very useful. And that's one of the first big things for me. But I also look for other things, of course, right? We have multiple rounds of interviews in general with students who want to work with us. We go through this paper analysis or idea development, multiple rounds, and also different people in my group interview the person, and that gives a sense to different people, including me, as to are they a good fit for the group, right? Because there's certainly the critical thinking aspect, which is important, but there's also an aspect: will they fit in the group nicely, and will they be able to work with a lot of people? My group is very collaborative, so that's a good thing, and we test that also, certainly. But of course, in a PhD is a very long-term endeavor, right? And it's important to see that people are committed. That's also another thing that we try to see, and usually that's hard to test, I think, right? How do you test commitment? There's also creativity component. Creativity you can perhaps guess a little bit based on the process that we just discussed, paper reviews, for example. But commitment, usually students work with us before they start a PhD. I like that. I've kind of grown into that model, especially because of the mechanics how ETH works these days. But if we, after the interview process, if we like a student, we offer an internship or some sort of internship type thing. They come for, usually I recommend at least 6 months. But it can extend to 1 year also. And we basically test each other. And I think this is good for everyone. We test the student to see if they're actually a good fit for the group, and they're committed to do a PhD. And also they test us, right? Is the right place for them. And it's good for them in the sense that they get paid for doing this. Unless they're remote. I mean, some people have done remotely also, in which case they may not get paid. Depends on the situation, basically. But if we bring someone to Zurich, we pay them. So in the end, it's a good experience for them. If it works out, it's great. If it doesn't work out, it's good experience. So that's what we have adopted. And a lot of students do bachelor's or master's thesis with us. And again, that's kind of how we work with them and test them, and they test us through those.
Right.
Yeah. So there are multiple levels of, let's say,
Yeah.
analysis that happens into how I recruit students. I actually get a lot of students who are interested because of the lectures we have on YouTube.
Right.
A lot of students watch them and they get, let's say, excited or trained. And some of them are interested in working with us, and they send messages, and I tell them to apply, or they directly apply sometimes, and they mention the lectures, etc. So that's another, I think, good way of recruiting students.
So two follow-up questions on that. One is related to the funding model, right? You were at CMU before, and you were also a career award you have received when you were at CMU. So we are curious to know the US funding model versus European/Swiss funding model. What are the differences? What are the similarities? And sort of related question is, in terms of academic ecosystem, what differences or similarities do you see between US and ETH Zurich?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the funding model, as a professor, of course, this is in the US. So Switzerland is special. I should probably say that. In Switzerland, especially the federal universities, and maybe in Germany, some universities, you get some base funding, especially if you're a full professor. You get some good amount of base funding to support some number of students. I'm not talking about that number here, but you can negotiate that also. But basically, if you are willing to have a group small enough, you don't need to write any proposal or find funding. You can just use that base funding that comes from the federal government, just because you're a full professor there. And actually, some assistant professors also get a smaller amount also. So if somebody's interested in being an assistant professor in Switzerland, it's not a bad deal. You get some number of students without any questions asked or without writing a proposal. So if you're willing to have a group that's small enough, you don't need to write any proposal. And I like this because it gives you freedom to explore things that nobody may be interested in exploring, let's say. So there's some fundamental aspect to it. And also, there's a second huge benefit, which is it relieves you from trying to support every single student, right? That means that you spend more time on research, more time on working with students, whatever you're interested in, basically. It could be more time for yourself also, right? Whereas in the US, I think, which I've been through also, which I enjoyed also, actually. I don't want to pick sides right now, but in the US, I believe in all places that I know of, the professor needs to find funding for every single student. I mean, of course, there's TA-ship, etc., but that requires some more responsibility from the student to do something else. But if you want research assistants, you need to find funding for every single student, which means that if you want to support a large group, it becomes a bit tougher. I had a large group at CMU, so I did write a lot of proposals. So it was actually fun. It was successful, and it was not bad. But as funding rates go lower, this becomes a bit harder to do, especially to sustain a large group. Whereas in Switzerland, I think it's I still write proposals, and I get help from my students writing to write proposals. So they get trained in proposal writing, etc. If they want to become a professor, for example. But I do it less so and less often. There's also another difference, I think, between US and Switzerland, and I think Europe in general. That's the funding rates. So whenever you write a proposal, I think the rates have reduced in the US quite a bit. Maybe it's become a little bit better more recently, but it's still lower than the acceptance rate of proposals that we have in Switzerland. So, for example, I think I got several NSF proposals rejected when I was at CMU initially. I got the career award, etc. But that came a bit later after some rejections. Of course, that was a different time in my career, but my only SNF, Swiss National Science Foundation proposal got accepted nicely and easily. Let me put it that way.
And do you see any differences or similarities in terms of academic ecosystem, like teaching responsibilities or service responsibilities, and those kinds of things?
Yeah, those are actually, I mean, at least at ETH. ETH is, at least at ETH, they're very similar to what I've experienced at CMU. ETH is an interesting place because it has part of the German model and part of the US model. But I believe US model is a lot more dominant. Even though German is the language that's spoken by most people, it's very much like a US university in terms of what professors do. Essentially, the teaching load is very similar to what I have at CMU. The expectations from research and teaching is very similar. Expectations and service is very similar, which grows as you become more senior, of course. Yeah, I don't see a big difference, at least between ETH and the US, top universities in the US. I mean, it may be different in other parts of Europe, but I'm not sure. There may be more teaching load in some other universities, but that's true for the US also, right? Depending on which university you go to, teaching load may vary.
Yeah. So, my next question is related to research impact. I think there are various ways to measure impact, right? I think publications, open source artifacts, and releasing teaching materials, and you have also a YouTube channel, very popular YouTube channel. I have benefited personally from that.
That's great to hear.
So I'm curious to know about if there are any other ways for research impact. I would love to know that as well. But how do you view all these avenues for increasing research impact? And maybe I would add also commercialization, startups, and so on. So how do you view all of them, and what are your views overall?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think all of them are good. Basically, that's why we're pursuing almost all of them. It's good to have many channels to have impact. And I think I will maybe broaden your question a little bit. It's not just research impact; it's also education and mentoring and impact on enabling opportunities for people who may not have those opportunities. I think I view our YouTube channel, for example, as an example of that. It reaches people that I have no idea whom is watching that channel. And actually, I get surprised sometimes at conferences, people from Latin America or Philippines. Actually, I've not seen a person from Philippines from a conference, but I received emails and they invited me to give a talk that benefit from this, and they're excited about going into topics that we cover: architecture, security, bioinformatics, storage, memory. So I think that sort of impact I enjoy. This is something that we did not really think about at the time we started the channel, which was in 2012 at CMU. But over time, we realized that it's actually a nice thing, a nice, let's say, benefit to many people in the community. It democratizes the access to, let's say, education. And we've been doing it now. We're live streaming all of the courses. So people actually join from, again, we don't know where they join from. Sometimes they mention they're joining from India or wherever, Turkey or someplace. And they ask questions online on YouTube. So that sort of engagement is actually nice to have, I think. So that's part of the impact. But you mentioned a bunch of other things, of course, right? Publishing papers, certainly publishing papers at top venues or venues where you get visibility of the paper in general. That's very helpful for your research reaching both industry and people in academia so that they can build on it. And we do a lot of that, of course. And I believe a lot in open sourcing. I mean, YouTube channel is an example of open sourcing everything, right? I think the reason why we actually did that initially was I wanted to have, I didn't want my, I am very much against wasting effort. If I have one principle in life is minimize waste. So I didn't want to deliver a lecture and have it go wasted. Meaning if I deliver a lecture once, the impact is on people who are in the lecture room. But why not actually maximize the return on investment? Try to enable that to be seen by many people, right? So that was the reason we started actually to not minimize this. But I see that also for open sourcing artifacts, right? We do some research. Okay, you write a paper about it. If you don't open source it, maybe there's some limited impact, right? But if you actually open source the artifact together with it, either at the same time or maybe, 2 years later, it will benefit some people, and people will take it and build on it. It will also benefit industry, like our Ramulator We actually developed it initially while I was at Microsoft Research, and then my students took it when I was at CMU. And we eventually open sourced it in 2015 for the first time, and a lot of industry used it right now, and certainly a lot of academics use it. You can see them citing it in their papers. So I think the open sourcing is great. I'm quite happy that more people in the community are doing it right now. We have these artifact evaluation process, and also more people are open sourcing, even though they may not go through the artifact evaluation process for one reason or another. One reason being it has a tight schedule, right? Yeah. So I think these are all good points of impact. And you mentioned also commercialization. I think that's also good. I mean, I have not pursued it myself as building a startup. It may happen in the future. But we certainly work with companies to commercialize some of the ideas that we have. So a lot of companies, they may get interested in what we have written, for example. They come to us saying, oh, can we use this? And usually our answer is yes, because we don't patent anything we do. And if they need help, we help them in some way. And sometimes companies basically use whatever we put out without us knowing. We get to know about that later, some number of years, or never get to know about that. So sometimes so I think I like that. It's in the end, you may not know about your impact in the end, but that's okay also, right? That's part of the reason why we're educators.
This is great.
Yeah. I hope that answered your question.
No, I think this is great. I mean, great to know about all these avenues and your views on that. I think these are very insightful.
That's great to hear.
So I have two more questions, a little bit shifting gears and asking.
That's good. Tough questions.
So you have, of course, interest in research and teaching and professional service. I'm just curious to know what's the most rewarding part of your job.
Oh, okay. Wow. All of the above. But I mean, maybe sometimes service is not the most rewarding part. I mean, I enjoy doing the holistic thing, but I think the most rewarding part in the end, as I mentioned earlier, the main reason to go to academia is working with students and seeing how they develop over time, especially PhD students or longer term trainees, let's say. That sort of thing is very unique, I believe, to academia. And I would say that's the most rewarding part. In general, it's the most rewarding part is related to, I think, human interactions. So you see how they grow and how they become how they have their own group, for example, or how they do something big in industry or during their PhD at any time in their lives. So I think, or seeing them in the end achieve some things that they didn't think they would achieve when they started working with you. I think that's the most rewarding part. So I like believing in people, and I kind of encourage my students to do more. And the goal is to really get them to a place where they see at the end, oh, I didn't know I could do this. Right? And then once you actually have that feeling, you could do anything, in my opinion. So that empowerment, enablement is something that I feel is the most rewarding. Of course, there are other rewarding parts that come close, like if someone comes to you at a conference and says, oh, I went into computer architecture because of you. Oh, wow. Okay. That's nice, I think. Of course, right? I've seen that actually a lot more. And I thank those people. And then there's another, of course, I think the research impact aspect is also very interesting. Like I'm going in the order of importance, let's say, like seeing your research taken up by a company, implementing it, implementing some similar solutions, or finally acknowledging that what you've done is actually good and important, is good. Like I mentioned this finally acknowledging because like we wrote the first row hammer paper in 2014. It got rejected once actually from Micro. It could have been published in 2013. But it got published in 2014, and a lot of DRAM companies, for example, didn't want to acknowledge it for some time. But finally, in 2023, at ISSCC, which is the top circuits conference, SK Hynix has a paper acknowledging the problem and talking about what kind of solutions they have, which resemble a lot of our solutions that we developed in the future. So that was very satisfying, for example. I mean, this is a particular instance I'm talking about. There are many instances, of course, where companies take our work and build. But this sort of thing, I think, is satisfying. Also, that shows that your research is actually having impact on real companies, big companies in the field. By the way, Samsung also had a paper that they published on Archive of similar nature.
I see.
Yeah. I think those are the top three things I would say that is the most rewarding and satisfying.
Awesome. Yeah. So you spend a lot of time on these aspects, right? Research, teaching, services, professional side of things. But how do you balance time, given that you have limited time with your personal obligations and personal commitments? How do you balance both, and what is the significance of that balance? Because research career, professional career is very long, and and how do you make sure that it is also rewarding from other aspects of life?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. Basically, people need to be in harmony with themselves in terms of what they're doing. I think the best is achieved when your work is in harmony with everything else in your life. I think this partly this comes from how much you like your work. So I don't see my at least most parts of my work, let's say, as work. It's more like a lifestyle. Like I do research, I enjoy it. I don't get. I could get paid doing something else. Probably get paid much more doing something else somewhere else, right? But this is what I like, and this is how I feel the rest of my life is in harmony with what I do. So I see this as a lifestyle. So working hard doesn't really make me feel, let's say, oh, I'm not doing something that I really want to do. Because this is what I want to do partially, right? But of course, I mean, this cannot be taken to the extreme. Everybody needs to do other things as well, right? We're not just doing research. So I do a lot of other things to balance as well. Like I swim a lot, spend time with family a lot, travel a lot. And combining all of these three actually is a good thing. Swimming, spending time with family, and traveling at the same time. So I think everybody needs to find their way of living in harmony with their work. If they don't like what they're doing, I think that's a good start to change, in my opinion, to move to something that is more harmonious with the rest of their life, right? I know that some people don't like what they're doing and they may be stuck in it. It's good to try to change. So what else do I do? I like reading. I think reading, especially books, not technical books like literature. I used to do more of that in the past, but I still try to do as much as I can. Reading about history is good, especially when I visit some place. I try to read history. So I don't know if this answers your question, but this gives an idea of, I think, that like there needs to be certainly a balance, I think. Like I think swimming is my huge thing that I've been doing for a long time, for 15, 16 years. Like I swim a lot actually, whenever I have the chance. So that's actually some place where I feel comfortable, and also it feels like I can go to sleep while swimming. So it's actually a relaxing thing. It may look like physical exercise, but it's actually mentally and physically also quite relaxing, in the sense that I can sleep less when I swim more, which is interesting. So it's good to think about, I think, what people are. So everybody's different, of course. Right? For me, it's swimming. It used to be hiking at some point. I like hiking, but for some reason I can hike less these days. After I try to. So everybody has their own thing, I think, that they can do. I'll leave it at that for now, unless you want to go into more detail.
No, this is great. This is great. Yeah. So these are the set of questions that we had. Do you have any other comments for the audience that who is looking at this interview?
Okay, I think. Well, I guess a lot of people may be looking at this interview, but probably the most important audience is students. Students who are starting their PhD, or who may be thinking about doing a PhD, or going to industry, or thinking about becoming faculty members. I mean, I think the only big thing that I may say, of course, there's a lot to say, but otherwise this will get to hours. I think the only big thing I would say is do what you're really excited about doing. I think that's the most important thing. If you do something that you're truly excited about, which may take time to find, so you may not know immediately what you're really excited about, but then you need to explore to figure out what you're excited about and figure out at some point. Maybe you're excited about multiple things like me, which is fine. But trying to do what you're excited about doing is the most important thing. Don't worry about other things. If you're excited about what you're doing and if you do it rigorously, if you do the right things, focus on, let's say, scholarship, doing the best thing as much as you can, everything else will follow, in my opinion. Then you'll enjoy it. And for some reason, if it doesn't work out, you'll have other opportunities, right? You'll move to the next thing that you're excited about, hopefully. So that's what I try to do. And when it works out, it's great. When it doesn't work out, we move to the next thing. Hopefully that's useful.
Great. Thanks so much for your time, Onur.
Yeah, thank
it's
you.
really a pleasure to talk to you and learn about your views and experiences.